Hi, welcome to the show. And many of you may know that we have an open seat for judge coming up. Judge Ron Stone is retiring, and so there'll be an election for a new judge. It's an important time. And I have with me one of the candidates for that position, Jennifer Chapman. Jennifer, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You know, like I said, it's an important time. Whoever's elected will be a judge for a long time. And we're proud of our judges right now, I think, and so we're looking to fill that spot with somebody that we're going to have a long and happy relationship with. So I'm glad that you are running,
Thank you. Thank
and
you.
glad that you're stepping forward to be on the show and tell us so we can get to know you. You don't usually get a lot of time to chat with the judges once they're elected, but now we get to. All right.
Yes, it's an interesting time, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to where'd you grow up?
I was born in Iowa, and my parents moved me to Dallas, Texas when I was about 2 years old. And so I spent the majority of my younger years in just outside Dallas, Texas, in a town called Garland. So you may or may not have seen that show depicted in some of the cartoons that they have out there. I think the Family Guy is based in Garland, Texas.
Is that right?
Yes,
Okay, that's a claim to fame, definitely. So you grew up and you went to high school in Garland
I did.
and then graduated, and where'd you go to undergrad?
I double majored in political science and psychology at the University of North Texas, which is about 45 miles northwest of Dallas.
So political science. And you took a class that kind of changed your life. What was the class?
It was don't remember the official title, but it was a class about the Supreme Court.
Okay, and why were you attracted to that? Political science, Supreme Court?
I was always really fascinated by how government works, how laws were made. I thought that all of those subjects were just really, really fascinating. This particular class was one of many that I could have chosen. It turned out that it was kind of a fateful decision that I took this class.
What happened?
I found myself really enjoying the curriculum. I loved reading the cases and reading the different theories of the cases. And then I happened to, so as part of the closing exam, so to speak, we were all required to argue cases before a panel of justices. And those justices were made up of law professors from various law schools throughout the state.
Wow.
And you know, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I found that I really enjoyed preparing for it, and I really, really enjoyed the process of answering questions and taking questions that were asked of me and kind of spinning it to make it fit, you know, my client's theory of the case. And after that, a couple of the professors came up to me. I remember one in particular was a dean of admissions or dean of something from the University of Texas's law school. And he came up to me and he said, "You are going to law school. You are going to law school at my school. And whatever you do, you're going to law school."
Wow.
And it was the first time I'd really ever considered that.
That is incredible. Yeah. You were drawn to it, you were good at it, and then somebody said, "Yeah, we want you."
And it happened to coincide. There was a classmate of mine. I had grown up believing that we had too many lawyers in this country. I think a lot of people have that belief.
Yeah.
And but I knew that there was a classmate of mine. His name was Judson, and his father was an attorney. And Judson was just amazingly talented. And you heard him speak in class, and you just knew that the world was going to make room for Judson, the attorney. Unfortunately, his father was murdered, and then Judson became overcome with grief, and he committed suicide. And that unfortunately roughly coincided with the professors coming to me and saying, "You need to do this, you need to go to law school." And even though I didn't know Judson very well, I knew him enough to feel like, okay, Judson can't do this, I'm going to do this instead. And that sealed the decision to go to law school.
That's very moving. Wow. And so, but you didn't go to the University of Texas.
No, I didn't.
Well, why not? Did you apply even?
I did.
Okay.
Actually, I take that back. I did not apply to the University
Okay.
of Texas.
You considered it strongly.
My mother considered strongly.
Ah.
I remember my mother actually tried to apply on my behalf. But I was really adamant that I had a good life in Texas, but I wanted
Yeah.
to try something different.
You
And
wanted to
so
go out of state.
I did. It was really important to me for a variety of reasons. And so I applied to 3 different schools, one in Virginia, one in California, and I needed a backup option just in case I didn't get into those 2. And so I added Lewis and Clark in Portland to that list. I got into all 3 of those schools, and fate kind of nudged me along, and I found myself moving to Portland
All right. To go to Lewis and Clark.
to go to Lewis and Clark.
Now, I've visited Lewis and Clark, and the law school, I think most of a law school is a library and a commons, and then there's 3 or 4 classrooms all in a row.
Correct.
And that's it. There's not a whole lot more.
Correct.
And so you spend law school in like 4 classrooms that don't have anything in them but seats and a lectern.
Correct.
So when I saw that, I went, what's law school like?
For me, it was really fun.
Uh-huh.
I've always been kind of that academic.
Yeah.
I really enjoy lectures. I really enjoy learning more information. What was really nice about Lewis and Clark and why I was glad that I went to that school was that you were surrounded by mostly the same people all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was lucky, my particular class, most of the students that year came from out of state.
Mm-hmm.
And so we very quickly became a family. Now, in a family setting, you know each other's flaws, you know each other's weaknesses, and you can drive each other crazy pretty quickly. But we were a family.
Uh-huh.
And we learned from each other. And I think the diversity in the student population, the diversity in the ages and the geographical locations, I think that really added to the law school experience for me.
Okay, so that's law school's how many years?
It was 3 years for me.
And do you specialize in law school?
You can, most people don't.
Okay.
Typically, where you start to specialize is if you want to become a tax attorney, a patent attorney. They have particular curriculum geared towards those subjects. But most people, by and large, when they go to law school, they find themselves specializing not necessarily through the schoolwork, but through the experience that they have in internships and law clerk assignments. And then once you start practicing law.
So what were some of your special assignments? What some of that early experience that you had?
First, I went to Europe. I decided that, again, I've always been someone who likes to get as many experiences under my belt as I can. So I took international human rights classes and some other international business classes in Europe. There was one, I think it was 6 weeks in Siena, Italy, and then there was a 3-week program in Amsterdam. When I came back, I was fortunate enough to be hired as a law clerk at the Oregon Department of Justice in Portland. And I found myself working under a fantastic couple of mentors, and that's where I worked throughout the rest of law school.
Now, for us people that aren't in law clerk sounds like it's not very descriptive on what you're doing as a clerk. People usually clerk means you file things. I imagine there's more to it than that. Tell us what a law clerk is about.
A law clerk can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it really depends on where you go and who you're practicing with and who the attorneys are and how much they trust you, frankly. For me, what being a law clerk meant was that my boss sat me down very early on into the assignment, and he said, I hired you to fight with me because if we're going to have the best work product, then I need you to challenge me so that we can get to that result.
Oh, not fight with me on the same side. Fight with me.
Fight with me.
Yeah.
And so what would happen is he would draft a brief and I would edit it. And he would change it back to the way it was originally and I would change it back. And we would fight, and I would pull out the dictionary and I'd pull out the statute book, and or I would write a brief and he would do the same thing, and we had that exercise. And as a result of having that competing input, it was actually fantastic. And he trusted me so much that by the time I was a third-year student, he signed the paperwork so that I could become what's called a certified law student. Certified law students are able to practice as you would as an attorney, but in a limited role, you have to be supervised. But I was able to go and argue cases and argue arbitrations, and I was able to do that as Jennifer Chapman. I wasn't Jennifer Chapman at the time, but I was able to do that as myself as opposed to having to watch him do it. So that was a really, really neat experience, and I was really lucky to have had that.
So you were a sparring partner, it sounds like, and somebody that he didn't have to play easy with.
Correct.
And then also someone that he trusted to go out and do some of the cases in the way that he would have done them. In other words, fight in his style or fight for the causes. Tell me what you were doing when you went out to at the Department of Justice. What kind of cases were you taking?
So I worked in the civil recovery section, and what that section was I always describe it as state plaintiffs' work. And so what he did, his specialty within that was bankruptcy and a lot of wage and hour cases. I did a little bit of the bankruptcy for him, but not really. I think I spent the majority of my time working on the wage and hour cases, prevailing wage cases, cases involving the Bureau of Labor and Industries.
So you sounds like you did well on your clerking, and you clerked for an incredible experience. You did well, and you got that extra recommendation of being able to argue cases as yourself.
Correct.
So meanwhile, back at law school, what were some of your favorite classes?
I loved contracts. I loved contracts, and I loved property. Both of those subjects fit my personality in the sense that I am very checklist oriented. I want to know what the elements are, be able to check a box, and then be able to figure out, kind of the science meets art. And contracts and property law really kind of lend themselves to that. I think property law also, it sort of involves a little bit of algebra, just in a legal sense, because you have to figure out the rule of perpetuities and if this, then this. And it's a very kind of walking calculus. And I think it may not make sense to people unless you've taken that class or you've done that kind of law, but it very much is like sitting through a math class. My father probably will love hear me say that. My father was always a mathematician, and I always said I hated math, but apparently I was good at it. So
Now, contracts, is that something that most law students take?
all law students have to take contract law. It's one of those classes that you take it and you think, how did I get through this much of my life without understanding these basic concepts? It is a core subject in most, if not all, law schools.
Do some students find that they hate it?
A lot of students do. It is not made for everybody.
Okay, so some people at that point know they're not going to be a contract lawyer.
Correct.
They're just going to get through the class and move on to what's another passion that people come out of law school with? What are the possibilities?
A lot of people come out really enjoying criminal law. And that's a pretty common subject. Or maybe they really enjoy family law. They like the divorce, they like the adoption, they like all of those different subjects. A lot of people really like tax law. So it really kind of depends. A lot of people like transactional law. One of the things that I really liked about contract law is that it very much lends itself to litigation, and where you've got a situation and what does a contract mean? No one knows better how confusing a contract can be, except those who have litigated problems associated with that contract. But there are a lot of people that don't like that element of the law. They would prefer to be kind of behind the scenes and working on more transactional matters. Let's develop a multi-million-dollar contract and let's figure out the terms and let's assess risks between the different businesses. I think that's a fairly popular model. I think, frankly, that's where a lot of the money when it comes to law comes in, that and patent work. Neither one of those subjects ever really interested me, but those are definitely valuable subjects.
So coming out of law school, you had some ideas of what you liked and what directions you might go. How did that line up with your experience? What did you do coming out?
I considered working or applying to be an honors attorney at the Oregon Department of Justice, which is how they hire their newbie attorneys.
To kind of continue in that same realm you had been in as a clerk.
Correct. But I was encouraged by my boss to make sure that I liked that work. And so I ended up finding a job with a sole practitioner who handled debtor bankruptcy and family law. And so I worked there for about, I want to say it was roughly about 6 months. And then I was hired by a law firm that handles insurance defense. And so they did, I probably did 50% construction defect and 50% personal injury work there. And approximately a year and a half, 2 years into it, my old boss from the Department of Justice called and said, "We've got an opening in our section, please come back." And I went through the application process, and I still remember receiving that phone call from Hardy Myers, who was the Attorney General at the time, offering me the job. And so I went back.
At the Department of Justice.
Correct.
And again, then specializing in what kind of law?
So again, it was the civil recovery section,
Civil
but when I came back, I was based out of our Salem office, and that's when I moved to McMinnville. When I was there, I did a wide variety of cases. The nice thing about the civil recovery section was the diversity in the assignments that we had. So I would do anything from child support matters to representing the Department of Human Services in cases, representing the Department of Revenue against tax protesters. We've got we had a situation in which the Oregon Lottery it had accidentally paid out on the same lottery ticket a couple of different times, or someone had messed with the machines, or there were different business transactions that had gone awry with the Small Business Administration. Any number of things where you might consider a state agency needing to take some sort of affirmative action to get money back within the state coffers, that type of work fell into the civil recovery section, and I got to work on it.
So I hear you've mentioned a lot of different areas of law in your experience.
Yes.
You've touched on a lot of different things. And then the Department of Justice, where did you go from there?
So after the Department of Justice, I was a unionized attorney. And so I was represented by the Oregon Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. And through that representation, I fell in love with AFSCME. And I had a really hard time when I started thinking about should I leave, should I not leave. I knew I had a really good experience at the Department of Justice. They had become like a family to me. But one of the reasons that I finally made the switch and went to be in-house counsel at AFSCME was that I knew that I could maintain a lot of those relationships because we did represent those attorneys. And so even today, a lot of the attorneys that I worked with at the Department of Justice, even though it's been several years, they remain some of my closest friends.
So ask me, what kind of work did you do there?
I'm still there. And so I do a little bit of a lot of different things. We represent approximately 28,000 workers. They are state workers, county workers, municipal workers, a lot of private sector workers as well. And so I might do anything from reviewing a contract and giving advice as to what this contract means, or I might appear before an arbitrator and argue a case involving either a termination or a breach of contract. I might appear before the Employment Relations Board talking about whether or not certain unfair labor practices have been committed. Or in many cases, I might appear before the circuit court because one of our members has a need or there's been some action taken against AFSCME, and so we've got some dispute that needs to be handled through the circuit court mechanisms. I also am fortunate enough to be able to argue before the Oregon Court of Appeals, and I've been fortunate in that at least a couple of the cases that I've brought have been successful appeals, and so that has been a very nice experience for me.
You've argued in front of a lot of courts, a lot of judges.
I have.
You've had experience with a lot of judges.
I have.
You, at this point, have said to yourself, I could be a judge.
I have.
Wow. What are some attributes of a good judge? You've seen what works, and you've seen some things that might get in the way. of administration of justice and a judge. So what have you come away with all that experience?
This is going to seem a little bit silly, but what I have figured out is that many of the same qualities that make a good referee at a kid's soccer game, a good judge at the Winter Olympics, are some of the same qualities that you look for in a judge, which is you want to be the judge that nobody talks about. Because the best judges are the ones that are persistently fair. They are consistently fair. They are fair to both sides. They don't enter into a situation with a clear bias on either direction. And as an attorney, I think it's really important that people understand that even if a judge has a bias in your favor, that doesn't help you. It actually can make things worse for you in the long run. And so I
If they
think
don't play by the rules, that'll mess up your case.
well,
If they bend things for you.
absolutely. I mean, the reality is that if a judge is willing to ignore the law in your favor, a judge is going to be willing to ignore the law in a way that hurts you as well.
Now, you've seen that happen.
I have seen that happen, yes.
Okay. So you've seen all these examples of, maybe you've seen some bad behavior. What's an example of where you thought, I could have done that better? Did you have any of those?
I do.
Okay.
I think one of the best examples, we had an inmate that got it in his head that he should not be responsible for violating the rules at the Department of Corrections. And so if one of his fellow inmates reported him for rule violations, he should get reimbursed for that. And so he started to file small claims lawsuits throughout the state against various inmates that said, quite literally, I was put in the hole, solitary confinement, for blank number of days. I want other inmate to pay me $100 a day for every day that I was in the hole. And then, just because of the way that the process worked, the other inmate didn't respond. And multiple judges throughout this state, I won't name names, gave him a judgment in his favor for those. I have to believe it's because those judges didn't understand the law or didn't understand what a problem that was.
What part of the law is that?
There's a contractual law.
So it's contractual law, perhaps, that maybe they were lacking in?
I think it's civil experience.
Civil experience.
I think
Okay.
civil experience in this context is really, really
Even
critical.
though this is being done by criminals, it wasn't a criminal case. So a person with maybe a criminal background wouldn't be prepared to, as well, to address a civil matter.
Well, no, I mean, the reality is, and this is true on a broader perspective as well, that a lot of our cases in this state are civil, what's called civil in nature. They are non-criminal cases. In fact, the majority of cases that are filed in the circuit courts every year are non-civil, or are non-criminal, excuse me. And if you don't work in that area and you don't have a breadth of knowledge to draw from, and you're in a situation which unfortunately is becoming a growing problem, in which people who have problems and are appearing before the court don't have either the resources or the time or the desire to get attorneys involved to help them. And so judges are having to make decisions, sometimes without the benefit of two attorneys on the either side explaining to the judge what the law is and what the outcome should be. And that can be a real detriment to a judge who has to make decisions quickly. The courts have to run efficiently. Justice is nothing if it runs so slowly that the process grinds to a halt. And so I'm not faulting any judges. We have wonderful judges in this state, but I think there is value in having some of that civil experience so that when you're having to make a quick decision in one of these settings, you have a broad base of knowledge to draw from.
All right. Now, you're campaigning.
I am.
There's going to be a primary in May, and if no candidate gets more than 50%, there will be another election in November.
That's
is that
correct.
right? And there's quite a few candidates in the running right now. So you have, how many weeks is it till the primary? Okay.
8 or 9.
Okay.
Yes.
And you are not an experienced campaigner.
No, is it that obvious?
So you're kind of stepped up to do something very different, and then to take on a role that's really quite life-changing. Let me just touch on something right. I am sometimes concerned about safety of judges. Have you ever thought about that?
Constantly.
And you're willing to do that. How's that going down at home?
My family is really excited. I have a very supportive family. They understand that our lives, we've instilled in my boys, I have 4 of them, that it's really important to, contribute to your community and do the right thing for the community. Because if the community isn't viable, if it doesn't have a good reputation, if it's not working for everyone, it's not a community that we need to be in. And I think my boys and my husband trust me, and they believe in this process. And I think universally my friends and family believe that I would be a good judge. And so they're behind me 100% on this. Ironically, when I announced that I was running, I had multiple opposing counsel come and reach out to me and say, Jen, what can I do to support you? I think you would be a fantastic judge. And as an attorney, I think there is no greater compliment than hearing something like that from opposing counsel.
So opposing counsel for us novices means that people you had been in the courtroom on opposite sides of an argument.
Correct.
And so they respected their opponent, is what you're saying. That
Absolutely.
They looked over at you and went, uh-oh, I've got Jen. Oh, that is quite a compliment. What do you hope to bring to the circuit court in Yamhill County?
I think there are 2 big strengths that I bring, or 3, I should say. One is the civil experience. I simply have a very large breadth of legal background.
And Judge Stone had civil experience.
He did.
And he's the one you're running to replace.
Exactly. At the same time, I'm not foreign to criminal issues.
Mm-hmm.
I've done punitive contempt cases, which, for people that don't know, are you have to follow the criminal rules in order to do those cases. The same burden of proof, the same standards, the same rules. And I've also represented law enforcement officers and correctional officers, and I've been involved behind the scenes on cases involving the wording of restitution judgments. I used to represent the Crime Victim Services Division, and so I was constantly working with that division to make sure that criminal judgments were worded correctly, that they included restitution for the victims of crimes. And so I'm not foreign to those issues, but I have primarily my experience is civil experience, and I think that's a huge asset. I also think that another huge asset that I have is that I'm from this community, and I understand the issues that people in our community are facing. And I think that when you think about what makes a good judge, you have to think, it's not just about making decisions. Anybody can make decisions. It's about making sure that you are not only making the right decisions, but that people walk out of the courtroom feeling like they have been heard. And I think that's really, really important for a couple of different reasons. I think that it adds credibility to the system. I think that if people feel like they've been heard, but they've lost, at least they walk away feeling like they've been heard. There is tremendous value in that. I've had many, many clients say to me after a hearing, well, if I couldn't win in front of that judge, I couldn't win before anybody. I think it also, when you make sure that people feel like they've been heard, you also discourage appeals, and that's an efficiency issue. You encourage people to reach decisions more quickly behind the scenes, because it's, I've always thought that a judge, you shouldn't have to hire a background investigator to find out what a judge's ruling is going to be. You should simply have to hire an attorney to look at the law. And if attorneys know that a judge is persistently and consistently fair, then they can say to their clients before they ever get to court, you should resolve this because this is what the law indicates the outcome should be. Here is what I predict that you're going to get out of this situation. I think there's a tremendous amount of value, and I don't think people always necessarily think about that. They think of judges as making decisions, but really who the judge is can impact so much of our society, even for cases that don't ever reach that level. And I think that the third really strong thing that I have going for me is that I have a huge temperament and I'm reasonable, and I have a reputation for being reasonable, and I think that really can help people.
Well, Jennifer, I'm just delighted to get to know you, and I wish you all the best in this campaign. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.